Today is Sunday, September... let me try that again. Today is Sunday, November 24th, 2019, and this is episode 241 of the Defensive Security Podcast. My name is Jerry Bell, and joining me tonight, as always, is Mr. Andrew Callett.
Hello, Jerry. I understand dates can be confusing when you're busy time traveling all the time, but local reference, November 24th.
It is. It is. Can be quite confusing, yes.
But if you could get around to getting me some winning lottery numbers, I would really appreciate it.
My next trip forward, I will. Yep.
So how are you otherwise? How's things?
I'm doing very well. How are you?
I'm doing great. I've got my final surgery coming up in a week, though. So I might disappear for a week or two, but then they'll put all the Lego pieces back together and I'll be right as rain, they tell me.
Awesome. Be running the marathon again soon, right?
Again? Soon? Wait, are there bears chasing me?
They didn't tell you?
Because that's pretty much
that's part of the deal. Yeah.
Oh, man. I knew they were putting some extra parts in there for some reason.
That's right. That's what that battery is for. Keep you going. All right. Just a couple of housekeeping items. First, normal disclaimer, the thoughts and opinions are ours and not those of our cats and employers and wives, spouses, whatever. So, yeah. And also, thank you to our Patreon donors.
Yes, you guys are awesome. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Go ahead.
If you want to support the show, you're more than welcome to join our Patreon. I know we got real spotty there for a little bit, but I'm hoping we'll now get on a more regular schedule again.
Absolutely. We're trying. We are definitely trying. All right. So we have a couple of stories, some pretty interesting ones for today's show. The first one comes from bleepingcomputer.com, and the title is Allied Universal Breached by Maze Ransomware, Stolen Data Leaked. Now this is kind of
another ransomware story, Jerry.
Another ransomware story. I mean, we can't get enough of ransomware.
This one, though.
Yeah, so this one is a little different in a couple of interesting dimensions. Number one is it has some similarities to some stories we've talked about in the past. I think most recently the city of Johannesburg, where they were locked up with, I forget what strain of ransomware, but also the adversary claimed to have stolen data and was threatening to release data publicly if they didn't pay. And as it turns out, they never paid, and the data apparently was never released. Now, this is a similar kind of attack where the adversary apparently connected to Allied Universal's network and stole a bunch of data, and then propagated out this Maze ransomware, which then did its normal ransomware thing. And what is a little different than what I've seen in the past is the size of the ransom was pretty steep. It was, I think, 300 bitcoins, or about $2.3 million. Which is, a fair amount, and obviously not only was the ransom threat to not decrypt the data, which Allied Universal wasn't apparently very eager to do, but also to release this data, the data they stole publicly. Now, apparently, Allied Universal decided again that they weren't going to pay, and so one of the things this adversary allegedly told Allied was that they were going to contact the press. In particular, the author of this Bleeping Computer article, which they actually followed through on, and ended up posting in the forum of Bleeping Computer a link to the, I think it was about 10% of the data, 700 megabytes of compressed data, which Bleeping Computer confirms at least it appears to have come from Allied Universal. Now, I think Bleeping Computer felt pretty uncomfortable about being used as leverage in this attack against the company because they're still trying to, the adversary, I should say, is still trying to extort money out of the victim here. And, but I guess the ransom has gone up. I think it's, I think they said it doubled, but I don't know what the exact figure is. But the communications moved from the Bleeping Computer forums to some Russian hacking forum where the taunting continues, and it appears, by all indications, that unless Allied Universal pays the ransom, the rest of that data seems like it's likely to get released. So, unfortunately, not a lot of detail about exactly how this initial intrusion happened, but it's kind of interesting to see how this particular actor is really dogging the victim after the attack.
Yeah, a couple of interesting thoughts too. One, good news, if there is any, that the price of Bitcoin has come down a bit since the initial attack. So you can save a little money. But in a more serious note, reading some of the sort of propaganda from the attacker, Allied Universal Security is a physical security company. You can hire security guards and physical security guys from them. They're not an information security company at all. That's not what they do.
Correct.
But it seems like the attackers think they are. So they're kind of boasting, hey, we broke into a computer security company.
A security company, yes.
Maybe it was lost in translation. But anyway, just an aside. But the ransom has now gone up to $3.8 million. From the 2.3 initial. Okay. So it's probably some derivative of whatever the value of a certain number of Bitcoins is, I'm imagining. Although, like I said, Bitcoin's been dropping lately. Yeah, but as far as I know, and I think this article states this is the first time that I know of that data has been leaked as part of a ransomware, infiltration and incident.
Yeah, it's interesting. In the apparent back and forth between the author and the adversary here, that I think the author of the story asked the question, well, what kind of assurance would a company like Allied Universal have if they paid $2.3 or $3.8 million and that you would actually not still release the data? And their point was, we don't really care about the data. We just want the money. And if we weren't true to our word, then the next time we run this attack, the people aren't going to pay, which is kind of similar. I mean, it's very similar parallels to some of the earlier days of the more traditional ransomware discussions.
Yeah. You've now got these groups that have to sort of worry about their reputation, which is somewhat interesting and good because in many ways, ransomware in general has gotten a bit of a reputation of don't bother paying because you're not going to get the decryption key anyway for some of these groups. The other thing I thought was interesting is, and I haven't seen this a lot, there was ongoing communication and negotiation between the victim and the ransomware group. And rather than just hey, you can't talk to us, here's my Bitcoin address, either put the money in or you're dead kind of thing, which is what we typically have seen most often in the past, because apparently the victim offered to pay no more than $50,000 US for their decryption keys, and of course the bad guys say no way. The other thing I thought was interesting is this is a new aspect because now not only do we have active ransomware spreading in the environment, but we've got exfiltration of a large amount of data in addition to the ransomware, which could potentially trigger additional alarms depending on how they exfiltrate it. It's a little more complicated. It's not that much complicated to find an exfiltration point, but it is something that we as defenders could and should be looking for. If suddenly we see a big uptick in exfiltration of data, that could be the indicator of the early stages of a ransomware attack now.
Yeah, definitely. So so one of the things that struck me, obviously this is hopefully not a trend that we'll see, but if it is, we'll have to figure out how to deal with it. But one of the interesting aspects that I was thinking is, in kind of contemporary times, there's a lot more focus around personal privacy and the privacy of personal information when you have laws like GDPR and the California Consumer Privacy Act and lots more coming online, LGPD down in Brazil. And we've talked in the past about how draconian some of those fines are, but setting that aspect to the side for a second, I wonder if over time if this does end up becoming something of a trend, if there emerges some expectation that companies who find themselves in this position have an obligation to keep that personal data out of the public eye.
Well, it goes back to a debate we had in the past, which is a ransomware incident a breach in the sense of disclosure of data? And that was a debatable point. But here, it is a disclosure of data.
Correct.
And that changes a lot of the risk profile and aspect of these sorts of attacks, and potentially your compliance and regulatory environment and how you respond to these attacks in terms of notification. Because you're absolutely correct. If you look at the sample files, it looks like things like separation agreements and other, potentially PII-laden confidential bits of info. That's a whole different conversation with your potential regulator than, hey, our files got locked and we can't get back to them.
Yeah, exactly. So, obviously, I think this is likely to increase the scrutiny that a breached company would fall under from a regulator like under the GDPR or the CCPA or one of those other laws. But I guess that kind of setting those to the side, I do wonder if there is if there's going to be an expectation of companies to pay, and so it really changes the dynamics, I think, in an interesting way, because in the past, it was really, except in certain edge cases like maybe in healthcare and whatnot, if a company lost personal data, it wasn't necessarily the worst thing in the world for the end victim, or the consumer or the individual whose data was destroyed. But now this is a whole different ball game, right? The potential harm to people is much more pronounced, and I have to believe that if this becomes a more common tactic, that we're going to see pretty sweeping different types of regulations that address this, and I really wonder what those will contain, because right now ransomware and cyber attacks in general are a nuisance, but in general they don't have a terrible, and I say this knowing that there are certainly some cases where it is bad, but in general, a mass attack on Target or was it Marriott or Starwood Hotels? That was what I was trying to think of. They're not necessarily super damaging to the to an individual, but if it's your personal data that's actually being posted online and usable or useful in the commission of different types of fraud and whatnot, or you potentially ends up going in some kind of dossier about you, because like you said, it gives information about why you were terminated from your last job that would otherwise be pretty sensitive type of information that would not be public. So these are starting to be some of the things I suspect, looking at the names of the files, that under the GDPR would be considered special classifications of data, which are the kind of the most serious types of data. The intention there is this is the type of data that, if it were made public, would cause you as a person, real harm. You would suffer, real harm, and we can say that your credit card number being leaked online is a hassle, and maybe in certain other countries the laws are a little bit different, but this just changes the dynamics so dramatically. I think that I'm interested to see how governments will react.
Yeah, no, I agree. The other thought I had is, if I'm the bad guys and I know you're regulated, maybe I go threaten to leak this to your regulator directly to get you to motivate.
Yeah, like direct. You're on more direct blackmail. Yeah.
Oof, ugly stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. So, again, there's not a lot of detail about how this attack was perpetrated. But, I think the most acute thing here is not the ransomware component, but the actual data theft component. And like you said, this is not necessarily a new kind of thing. What's novel about it is pairing the two things together. And, we've been seeing for quite some time APT style attacks where they're going after data, but that data never sees the light of day again. We had the OPM breach, and there's been lots and lots of big breaches. The Anthem Healthcare breach a number of years ago is another good one. That data set, was, as far as we know, was never made public, and because they were very likely stolen by an actor to serve a very specific purpose, not to just create chaos, in the world, which is kind of, this is just a different situation. So time to really take another look at your defenses and your ability to detect data being exfiltrated.
Indeed.
All right. So our other story for today is also quite interesting. This one comes from CSO Online, and the title is "How a Bank Got Hacked," and then is a study on how not to secure your networks. So the story here is from the infamous hacker named Phineas Fisher, who we've talked about a couple of times in the past. This story actually comes from an attack that was perpetrated back in 2016 on a couple of banks in the Caymans. And this comes from a blog post that was released by, or at least purported to be released by Phineas Fisher, that describes the methodology that he used, or he or she or they used in the attack. And it's interesting because it, on the surface, seems like it's pretty sophisticated, but when you read through the details of how the attack was perpetrated, there's really not that much sophistication. Although I do think that throughout the blog post, the Phineas Fisher, or whoever this person or people are, it continually talks about how unsophisticated and unknowledgeable they are, and I have to think that's kind of like a backhanded, like another slap against the victim here. Like I'm dumb and even I could get in. Ha ha ha.
Yeah, but I think the takeaway for us is that using common off-the-shelf tools, he, she, they, them. I'm just going to say he to make my life easier. Was very successful. There wasn't a lot of really sophisticated stuff being used here, which goes to a couple of points. The bad guys only need to be as sophisticated as they need to be.
Right.
And, not everything is nation state. And even if it is nation state, by the way, there's nothing that stops a nation state from using very unsophisticated methodologies if it works.
Correct. Which we've seen in the past.
Yeah.
There's a current story, we don't have it in our list to talk about, but how the Iranian intelligence community is is perpetrating super advanced attacks against utility companies using password spraying attacks.
Wow.
Right?
That is
That's some
bleeding edge.
nation state stuff. So
the NSA.
yeah. So anyway, the blog post Phineas Fisher posted was titled "How to Rob a Bank." It's kind of interesting because this not only has Phineas Fisher's account, but it also includes a report that was commissioned by the bank, written by Price Waterhouse.
We think.
We think. I mean, but all intentions are. I've seen these reports before, and I have no.
Yeah, it looks pretty accurate.
Yeah. So anyway, there's a report that purports to be from Price Waterhouse, commissioned by the bank to investigate the intrusion, and Phineas Fisher had maintained access long enough to actually get a copy of the report. So that's kind of embarrassing as well.
Yeah, that's worth kind of taking a look at for just a moment. The bank reached out to PwC to come help them understand what was going on. So the initial indication of the bank was unauthorized SWIFT transfers. SWIFT is the inner banking money transfer system, one of them. And you might remember from a few years ago, going after SWIFT was all the rage.
Yep.
And this was, kind of in that time frame.
It was in that time frame, right?
Yeah. So keep in mind, 2016. So their first indication was that in their daily sort of reporting, seeing SWIFT transactions they didn't authorize. So they brought PwC in. Now, what's interesting about this is Phineas Fisher says that then he laid low and read their emails to keep an eye on the investigation. So very interesting takeaway for me there, which is the internal comm system that the investigation was using was compromised, and they didn't know it, and they didn't assume it, and they didn't have, as far as we know, alternate secure comms to conduct the investigation. So something to think about right there.
Oh, it's a good point. And they actually, if you read through the report, it was identified that the attacker had been trying to read email, but according to Phineas Fisher, the way he ended up accessing email was directly from the internet using their Outlook web access, using stolen credentials, and they of course didn't have two-factor authentication, which made this all the more easy. So there's a couple of other aspects of the story that are kind of interesting. One is that this attack was launched again. All this is alleged, based on what's in the blog post, but it all seems pretty realistic. So I don't have a particular reason to doubt it. The Phineas Fisher here says that the way he found the bank and gained entry was by scanning the internet, looking for vulnerable SonicWall firewall or SonicWall VPN appliances.
And there was a known exploit against SonicWall VPNs back then.
Correct.
It wasn't a 0-day. They just apparently, I don't know the exact timing, but it appears they did not patch. Correct.
And it was the same vulnerability, by the way, that Phineas Fisher had used against Hacking Team, which was also a number of years ago a pretty widely publicized attack. So same vulnerability. Anyway, in this particular case, Phineas Fisher put a wrapper on the SonicWall SSL VPN. He edited the login page to capture passwords, and so he knew that this, or I guess he later found out that they weren't using multi-factor authentication, and so he was able to capture the effectively the Windows domain credentials of people who were logging in remotely, and so that gave him a pretty far and wide access. He used very standard tools. He used PowerShell Empire and Metasploit and Meterpreter to move around, and he allegedly was in the bank's networks for about 5 months, reading the manuals on how Swift worked and how the bank ran their Swift exchanges and whatnot. And he made,
oddly, only one to ever read the manuals.
Yeah, correct. No one else reads the manuals. But apparently he did, and he made several successful transfers and allegedly stole a couple, as there's no definitive amount here, but a couple $100,000. So, that's not the $81 million that the Bank of Bangladesh lost, but still probably pretty significant for the Bank of Caymans.
It was also interesting to me, and I apologize if you mentioned this. PwC says he got in through a successful phishing email, and he denies that. He says, no, I got in through SonicWall VPN. But he goes on to say, but that means somebody else was probably fooling around on the network at the same time.
Yeah. So I caught that in the article too, but if you read through the PwC report, the way it's referenced, now I haven't read the whole 106, 109 pages of the report, but in one of the artifact analysis sections, they looked through email archives and they found, as you pointed out, evidence of a targeted phishing attack using, I think it was Adwind, the Adwind Trojan, which by all rights is a Trojan used in targeted attacks. And as you pointed out, this is not the method of entry that Phineas Fisher used. So it's unclear, by the way, if that other attack was at all successful, or if it just was sitting around in somebody's email, unopened or what have you. So, but yeah, that is kind of interesting. That and I should also, what I was going to say is that in the footnote on the PwC report, they indicate that they don't have any evidence one way or the other whether Adwinds was used in this attack or not. But one thing that is clear is that they did not identify, as far as I can tell, and again I haven't read the whole report, they did not identify the VPN concentrator as involved. So that's interesting.
And I'm sure one of your favorite parts of the report was that he was able to run Mimikatz on their Active Directory controller.
Well, of course. I mean, what else is Active Directory for? Like, I don't even... at some point...
Printing. It allows you to print over the network.
At some point, it should just come installed, pre-installed with Mimikatz. Like, why make this even harder?
When did you become the cynical one? I thought that was my job.
It's been developing. It's been...
How things have changed.
Yeah, it's been developing for a while. Let's see. So Phineas Fisher said that in the aftermath of PwC's investigation, they found a lot of his tools, the Meterpreter the Meterpreter shells and PowerShell Empire that he had used to maintain persistence, but they did not find his quote backdoor. And that was how he after a while he laid low and came back and ran Mimikatz again and got passwords, presuming that the passwords had been reset, and so he was back off to the races and had access to email. Presumably, that's how he got access to the PwC report, but no specific confirmation there. It is interesting, as you pointed out, about the importance of unless you're really damn sure that you don't have a continued problem, using your email as a method of coordinating response and communication, as is evidenced here. So kind of interesting, but at the same time, it's not email is probably not the only problem you have, right? I mean,
no,
you got to think,
and it's easy to look at it in hindsight and go, "Oh, look what they did."
Right. Yeah, exactly.
But, I don't point this out just to beat up on them. I point it out because it's something you should be thinking about ahead of a crisis.
Right. Yeah, exactly. I mean, if you have somebody in your network, or let's say you're a Windows shop and you've got a pretty pervasive breach, you almost anything on your network, your email, your any given workstation, any of your SaaS utilities like let's say Slack or what have you are quite possibly also compromised, if nothing else, through one of the workstations. And so, in that kind of a case, how do you respond? How do you coordinate incident response? Because without those tools, you're kind of you've got both hands tied behind your back.
Yeah, unless you've got a plan ahead of time.
Yes,
and test it.
And test it. That's right. And now I suspect that this particular bank was probably pretty small. When you read the long-term recommendations, you can kind of see, and you actually felt a little bad for them because it was like, you should probably hire a full-time IT security person.
Yeah, Yeah, I had very similar thoughts. I'm like, wow, this is a lot of really, really basic stuff, which tells me they either didn't have the opportunity, the budget, whatever, to do any of the real basic stuff. They didn't seem to even have a dedicated security.
Yeah, a CISO. One of the recommendations was to hire a CISO. But again, look, not every organization, just because they're a bank, doesn't mean there's some gigantic Bank of America style organization. So banks, by the way, historically are pretty low margin businesses, and so it's not necessarily surprising to see that they don't have they don't have everything that you might expect them to. But it does point out what can happen if if you don't have you don't have all the right parts in place. The other thing that I thought was pretty interesting was the way they were targeted. And as I mentioned, Phineas Fisher identified this bank using a ZMAP scan, looking for vulnerable versions of this VPN appliance, and apparently it was just kind of grepping through and found these IPs in the Caymans, and that for whatever reason was just interesting to him, and it turned out to be a bank, and so there it was. I think alleged. If you follow the logic, it seems like he wasn't really even trying to find a bank to attack. It just so happened that it was a bank running a vulnerable version of the VPN appliance in the Caymans, and all those three things lined up. In such a way to attract his attention. Well,
and unfortunately for them, he was quite successful.
Yeah. But, in the end, it doesn't sound like they had, they lost some money, but it's certainly not, among the most devastating attacks we've talked about. There was another story this week about how Target, the retailer here in the U.S. who had the major breach back in 2013, they're suing one of their insurance carriers for something like $70 or $80 million because the insurance company didn't pay, even though Target thinks they should have. And it's mentioned in there that Target spent close to $300 million in the wake of that breach. So that's a lot of money.
It's substantial, but Target's also making a crap ton of money. Let me see what their annual earning is.
They are a large company. You're right.
Yeah. So revenue for Target in 2018, $75.4 billion.
Yeah. So it's about 0.5%, I guess.
Yeah. Which again, it moves the needle, but it's not going to make the board freak out.
No.
But no. I will say larger companies can absorb it. I wouldn't say that those costs are probably linear based on the size of the corporation. In other words, a small company is probably outsized impacted because of, just the table stakes costs are so high.
It's a good point. It's a really good point. We know that, for instance, it was a couple $100,000 that was stolen. That doesn't say, for instance, how much they paid to PwC, which we can probably imagine was at least as much as was stolen, and whatever other remedial activities they undertook. So it probably easily got into the millions of dollars, I would assume. We know that in the city of Atlanta, who had a pretty famous ransomware incident last year, I don't know what the current number is, but they kind of went to town and funded a lot of long languishing IT upgrades and put that into the pot of damages, right? So we want to move to cloud, and but it's not been a funded initiative. But now we had this ransomware attack, so we're going to move to cloud, and now that move to cloud becomes part of the the damages that we attribute to the ransomware attack, which I guess in some respects you can understand, but in others it seems a little disingenuous. But there you have it.
And either way, I attribute the damages to your mom.
Very, very nice.
It's been a while.
Very, very nice. Yes. Did you like the book that I sent you, or the book cover? Right.
That was absolutely hilarious.
Yeah,
Yes.
I'll see if I can post a picture of that somewhere for the listeners. It was for those of you who are wondering, it's on Twitter. I posted this book I forget the name of it. It was like a guide to your mom, or it was how to pick up your mom. It's pretty funny. So,
if it didn't already exist, I would have had to have written it.
True, very true. All right. So, anything else?
There's a lot going on, but you and I are still kind of getting back in the swing, and there's so many other interesting stories out there. I would just say, hey, we're ramping back up, and hopefully we'll get back to a weekly cadence on this, or at least every other week, and get the shows out on a more regular basis. So thanks all for sticking with us. I know it's been a crazy year, some of which has been my health, some of which has been Jerry's schedule. He's a much busier and more important guy than I am, that's for sure. But hopefully we'll get back to being a trusted podcast provider for you. And just as a generic reminder, we are completely unsponsored, and we did that on purpose. We don't want any third parties influencing our editorial comment. So we do rely on donations and or just out of our own pocket. And I will say that people have been incredibly generous, and it's humbling and mind-blowing to me that all sorts of random folks out there throw some bucks our way to keep the show going. And I really, really do appreciate that. And I hope we have lived up to your expectation and made it worth it. And I feel bad that we've missed so many opportunities in the past year, but we're hoping to make it up to you now. And thank you for your continued support. And hey, even if you're just a listener, thank you for your support. Jerry and I do this because we want to do this. And we've been doing it for 5 years now?
Actually, I think you've been here 6 years. The podcast is about to celebrate its 7th anniversary in 2 weeks.
That's crazy.
So yeah,
that is crazy. So anyway, I just want to say, just random off-topic rant. Thank you for supporting us and continue to support us.
Absolutely, yeah. I'd echo that. Thank you very much. I'm not sure that I'm more important than you are, but thank you. And yes, we will absolutely strive to put out more shows in the future and kind of get back on track. And by the way, I haven't looked at our bandwidth usage, but before we went away for a little while, we were pushing, when I released, just so you know, we were for a couple minutes after, we were saturating about 5 gigs a second, which is quite a lot. Yeah, so
that is a lot of Coma Awards.
I've got yes, well, a lot of Coma Awards, a lot of prisons, a lot of
CIA black sites.
Yes,
that
right,
use us for torture.
Crowd control. Right, they blast it from the top of tanks to get people to disperse.
Hey, at least we're providing value.
Absolutely. I mean, it's some ways
to somebody.
It's different for everyone. Anyhow, thanks again for listening. For those in the U.S., happy Thanksgiving. Happy holidays to everyone everywhere else, and we'll talk again soon.
Have a great week, everybody. Bye-bye.
Take care.